Dr. Nexus Prime had seen countless impossibilities during his 47 cycles as a xenobiologist, but nothing had prepared him for the data streaming across his crystalline sensory matrix. He adjusted his posture in his private research chamber aboard Station Aurora, his exoskeleton catching the soft blue light from the holographic displays surrounding him. The numbers couldn't be right. He ran the analysis again. They were right. Surface X-912 shouldn't harbor life. It couldn't harbor life. The planet was a Category 9 death world, a designation reserved for only the most extreme environments in the known galaxy. Yet there she was, Sarah Chen, former engineer of the merchant vessel Star Wanderer, not just surviving but conducting research in conditions that should have reduced her to her constituent atoms within hours. Prime's assistant, Dr. Pollock Wave, rippled into the chamber, their gaseous form expressing concern through subtle color variations. The Grand Medical Amphitheater is prepared, Professor. The galaxy's leading minds await your presentation. Thank you, Pollock Wave. Prime clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Tell me, in all your studies, have you ever encountered a species that could adapt to environmental changes of 420 degrees in an 8.3-hour cycle? Never. Pollock Wave pulsed a deep indigo of certainty. The closest example would be the methane dancers of Jupiter's upper atmosphere, but they only handle variations of 150 degrees, and that's over a standard month. Prime gathered his presentation materials, his crystalline structure humming with barely contained excitement. Then prepare yourself, my friend. Today, we rewrite every xenobiological principle we thought we understood. The journey to the amphitheater gave Prime time to reflect on the day they first detected the anomaly. He had been leading a routine mineral survey of Surface X-912, studying the unique crystalline formations that covered most of the planet's surface. The crystals themselves were remarkable enough, structures that grew and changed in response to the planet's intense electromagnetic storms. But then their sensors picked up that impossible heat signature. The memory files played crystal clear in his mind, the research vessel's careful approach through storms of metallic dust and ionic discharge, the first glimpse of the cobbled-together shelter, and then, her. A human in a modified emergency pressure suit, clearing crystal growths from a makeshift solar array as casually as someone might tend their garden. The Grand Medical Amphitheater doors parted before him, revealing tier upon tier of the galaxy's finest medical minds. He recognized Dr. Vex III, the leading expert in cellular adaptation, her usually serene green form settled in the front row. The hive mind representatives buzzed quietly in their shared consciousness at the back, while the gas cloud collective swirled in elegant patterns near the ceiling. As Prime took his position at the center of the speaking platform, he noticed something unusual about the audience. Typically, at these gatherings, various species would cluster together, a natural segregation based on environmental needs and communication methods. But today, they were mixed, breaking normal social patterns in their eagerness to hear his findings. News of his discovery had spread faster than a quantum entanglement pulse. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications, he began, his voice modulator adjusted to reach every hearing apparatus in the room. Today, we gather to discuss what might be the most remarkable case in xenobiological history. The lighting dimmed automatically, casting that familiar soft blue glow across the assembled crowd. Prime activated the first hologram, displaying the environmental readings from Surface X-912. The reaction was immediate, several audience members emitted involuntary distress pheromones, and Dr. Vex III's color shifted from green to shocked purple. Yes, I see those reactions, Prime continued, gesturing with his upper appendages. Those numbers are not a malfunction. Surface X-912 registers at -240 degrees in its night cycle, soaring to +180 degrees during its day cycle. The atmospheric pressure is 13 times standard, and the radiation levels. He paused for effect. Well, let's just say your safety protocols would be screaming before you got within 1,000 kilometers of the surface. The assembled scientists murmured amongst themselves, their various biological communication methods creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses. Prime let them process the information for a moment before activating the next hologram, the first biological scan of Sarah Chen. "What you're about to see defies everything we know about biological adaptation," he announced. "This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story that forces us to question our fundamental understanding of life itself." The hologram showed Sarah's cellular structure, and the amphitheater fell silent. Even the hive mind representatives stopped their eternal internal debate. The scan showed something unprecedented, human cells not just surviving but adapting to conditions that should have destroyed them instantly. "Meet Sarah Chen," Prime continued, his voice carrying a note of reverence. "When we found her, she had been surviving on surface X-912 for 6 months, 14 days, and approximately 7 hours. According to every biological model we have, she should have died within the first hour." He brought up the initial medical scans, causing several medical devices in the audience to automatically shut down in disbelief. "Look at these readings. Her cellular structure should have shattered in the extreme temperature shifts. The radiation levels alone." Dr. Pollock-Wave stepped forward with additional data streams. "She should have been cooked from the inside out. Instead, we found her playing cards with a computer she built from salvaged parts." The audience's shock was palpable. A gaseous entity in the third row actually condensed partially out of pure surprise. Prime savored the moment, his sensory crystals vibrating with excitement. This was just the beginning. "But survival alone isn't what makes this case extraordinary," he continued. "What Sarah Chen did next, how she not only survived but thrived and conducted research in these conditions, will force us to completely rewrite our understanding of biological adaptation and the limits of survival." Prime pulled up a new hologram, showing the jagged crystalline surface of X-912. "The discovery happened during our routine mineral survey. Our scanners picked up what we thought was an equipment malfunction, a heat signature where no heat should exist." The recording played, showing the research vessels approach through the swirling storms of metallic dust and ionic discharge. As the small structure became visible, cobbled together from spacecraft debris in native crystal formations, the audience leaned forward in unified anticipation. "At first, we thought it was just another automated mining outpost," Prime explained. "Those things malfunction all the time on extreme worlds. But then..." He paused, tapping a control that zoomed in on a figure moving outside the structure. "Then we saw this." The recording showed Sarah in her modified suit, working methodically despite conditions that should have been instantly fatal. The suit wasn't even a proper environmental suit, it was a standard emergency pressure suit with crude modifications, held together by ingenuity and what appeared to be melted crystal fragments. The Star Wanderer was a Class 3 merchant vessel carrying industrial replicators to the Centauri colonies, Prime continued, displaying the ship's flight path. They hit an unexpected crystal storm that overloaded their shields and damaged their warp core. Sarah Chen, serving as the ship's engineer, had exactly 47 seconds to make a decision. The hologram showed the massive merchant ship breaking apart in surface X-912's atmosphere. Escape pods launched in all directions, but only one, Sarah's, had its trajectory manually calculated to land near a mineral deposit she had spotted on entry. She knew the standard emergency beacons wouldn't survive the planet's electromagnetic storms, Prime explained, his admiration evident in the resonance of his crystalline structure. So instead of following emergency protocols, she did something that our rescue experts are still calling brilliantly insane. Prime played Sarah's own recorded testimony, her voice filling the amphitheater with remarkable calm. "Look, it was simple math. The escape pod couldn't handle those pressure changes, but the planet's crystal formations create natural pressure pockets. I just had to land in one and work from there." "Simple math," Prime repeated, his crystals flickering with amused disbelief. She calls plotting a manual atmospheric entry through crystal storms, magnitude 9 wind shears, and electromagnetic interference that fried 3 of her pod's computers simple math. As the first part of his presentation drew to a close, Prime could sense the audience's growing anticipation. They knew, as he did, that this was only the beginning of an even more extraordinary story, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the limits of life itself. But survival, he said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial tone, survival was just the beginning. What Sarah Chen discovered on Surface X-912 would change our understanding of not just human adaptation, but of life itself. And that, my esteemed colleagues, is where our story truly begins. The amphitheater hummed with anticipation as Prime prepared to reveal the next phase of his findings. The true mystery of Surface X-912 and Sarah Chen's impossible survival was about to unfold, and with it, the foundations of xenobiology would never be the same, the first month. Dr. Prime paused his presentation, allowing his previous revelations to sink in. The holographic displays shifted, now showing detailed medical scans of Sarah Chen's physiological changes during her first month on Surface X-912. What you're about to see, he continued, his crystalline structure gleaming under the amphitheater's lights, defies every principle of adaptation we've ever documented. Dr. Vex III, you wrote the definitive text on cellular response to extreme conditions. How long would you estimate it takes for meaningful adaptive changes to manifest in a complex organism? Dr. Vex III, still maintaining her shocked purple hue, responded with careful precision. Under optimal conditions, with genetic engineering and controlled environmental stress, we might see minor adaptations over several generations. But never in a single organism, and certainly not in a matter of weeks. Exactly. Prime's mandibles clicked with excitement. Yet observe these scans from Sarah Chen's first 30 days on Surface X-912. The hologram expanded, showing cellular-level changes in crystal-clear detail. The audience watched in stunned silence as the data played out before them. Within the first 72 hours, Prime explained, her body began producing unprecedented levels of heat shock proteins. Her cellular repair mechanisms accelerated to rates we've only seen in theoretical models. But that was just the beginning. Dr. Pollock floated forward, their gaseous form rippling with academic excitement. Notice the bone density changes. By day 15, her skeletal structure had begun adapting to the extreme pressure conditions. We've never seen osteoblast activity at these rates in any known species. The presentation shifted to footage from Sarah's own emergency suit recordings. The video showed her first attempts to step outside her crashed escape pod, the crystal storms raging around her makeshift shelter. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, Sarah's voice narrated over the footage. The suit's environment readings were so far beyond its design parameters that everything just showed as error messages. But then I started noticing patterns in the chaos. The recording showed Sarah collecting crystal fragments, her movements deliberate despite the hostile conditions. She had rigged a crude sensor array from her suit's damaged systems, using it to study the crystalline formations that surrounded her pod. The crystals weren't just growing randomly, her voice continued. They responded to the electromagnetic storms, but not in the way you'd expect. They were adapting, just like I had to. Prime paused the playback. This observation proved crucial to her survival. Sarah Chen didn't just adapt physically, she began to understand Surface X-912 in ways our previous surveys never could. She saw patterns where our instruments only registered chaos. The hologram shifted to show Sarah's makeshift habitat. She had wedged her escape pod into a natural formation of crystals, using their structure to create a relatively stable pocket of survivable space. But it was what she did next that truly amazed the scientific community. Watch this, Prime instructed, advancing the recording. Day 23. The pod's life support systems had failed completely, and the emergency oxygen supply was running low. Any reasonable person would have given up. Instead, Sarah Chen did this. The footage showed Sarah working with salvaged equipment from her pod, combining it with local crystal formations in ways that defied conventional engineering. She had discovered that certain crystal configurations could act as natural pressure regulators, and she began using this property to create a sustainable living space. She called it crystal breathing, Prime explained. By aligning specific crystal formations and applying controlled electromagnetic pulses, she could create pockets of relatively stable atmosphere. It wasn't comfortable by any standard we'd recognize, but it kept her alive. Dr. Vex III raised a sensory appendage. But the radiation levels, even with adaptation, her DNA should have been shredded. Ah, Prime's crystals sparkled with satisfaction. This is where it gets truly interesting. Sarah discovered something about the local crystal formations that we'd missed in all our previous surveys. Show them, Pollock wave. The hologram shifted to display microscopic analysis of the crystal structures. The crystals didn't just block radiation, Pollock wave explained, their forms swirling with excitement. They absorbed it, converted it, and released it in forms that were actually beneficial to organic life. Sarah Chen didn't just survive the radiation, she learned to use it. The recording continued, showing Sarah's gradual transformation of her survival shelter into a crude but functional research station. She had begun documenting everything: crystal growth patterns, atmospheric variations, even her own physiological changes. By day 30, Prime continued, she had developed theories about the crystal ecology that surpassed our current understanding. But more importantly, she had begun to change in ways that should have been impossible. The medical scans reappeared, now showing comparison data between Sarah's baseline human physiology and her adapted state. The changes were profound: enhanced cellular repair mechanisms, modified bone structure, even alterations in her skin's ability to handle radiation. We've all studied evolutionary adaptation, Prime addressed the audience. We know it takes generations, countless tiny changes accumulating over time. Yet here we have a single human being effectively evolving in real time. The implications are staggering. The gas cloud collective near the ceiling swirled in patterns indicating deep thought. One of their representatives condensed briefly to ask, could this be replicated? Could other humans adapt this way? That's the remarkable thing, Prime responded. Sarah Chen's adaptation wasn't just a random mutation or a lucky genetic quirk. It was an active process, one she documented meticulously. Watch this recording from day 28. The hologram showed Sarah working in her makeshift lab, her voice steady despite the obvious strain in her movements. The crystals aren't just responding to the environment, she explained. They're learning from it. And somehow, incredibly, my body is learning from them. It's like we're adapting together. Prime let that sink in before continuing. What Sarah discovered wasn't just a way to survive on Surface X-912. She stumbled upon a completely new paradigm of biological adaptation, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about the limits of life itself. The presentation shifted to show Sarah's early attempts at cultivating crystal gardens. She had discovered that by applying different electromagnetic frequencies, she could influence crystal growth patterns. More importantly, she began to notice that the crystals seemed to respond not just to electrical stimulation, but to biological presence as well. Look at this footage from day 25, Prime indicated. Watch the crystal formation's response to her proximity. This isn't just random growth, it's almost like symbiosis, Dr. Vex III finished, her color shifting to a thoughtful blue-green. The crystals were adapting to her presence just as she was adapting to them. Exactly. Prime's excitement made his entire crystalline structure resonate. But it goes even deeper than that. Sarah Chen wasn't just surviving in an impossible environment, she was beginning to understand it in ways we never could. She was becoming part of Surface X-912's ecosystem. The hologram showed Sarah's notes from this period, revealing increasingly complex observations about the relationship between the crystal formations, the planet's extreme conditions, and her own physiological changes. She had begun to map out patterns in the crystal storms, predicting them with uncanny accuracy using nothing but salvaged equipment and her growing understanding of the planet's rhythms. By the end of her first month, Prime continued, Sarah Chen had done more than just survive. She had begun to thrive. Her cellular structure had stabilized in ways our models still can't fully explain. She had developed methods to predict and utilize the planet's deadly storms. She had even started to understand the complex relationship between the crystal formations and the extreme environment. Dr. Pollock floated forward again, adding, but perhaps most remarkably, she had begun to document something none of our previous surveys had detected, signs of organized crystal growth patterns that suggested a level of complexity we had never imagined possible on surface X, 912. The amphitheater hummed with excited discussion as Prime prepared to move to the next phase of his presentation. The story of Sarah Chen's first month on surface X, 912 was extraordinary enough, but what came next would challenge the very foundations of their understanding of life itself. But this, Prime announced, his voice carrying a note of barely contained excitement, this was just the beginning. What Sarah Chen discovered in the months that followed would force us to question everything we thought we knew about the nature of life, adaptation, and the very limits of possibility itself. Because deep beneath the crystal storms of surface X, 912, something was stirring, something that would change our understanding of the universe forever. Crystal connection, unveiling the network. Dr. Prime's crystalline structure pulsed with anticipation as he prepared to reveal the next phase of Sarah Chen's extraordinary journey. The holographic displays in the Grand Medical Amphitheater shifted, now showing complex patterns of energy signatures flowing through surface X 912's crystal formations. What you're about to see, he announced, represents the moment when survival became discovery, and discovery became revolution. The audience leaned forward, their various sensory organs focused intently on the display. 3 months into her stay on surface X, 912, Sarah Chen made an observation that would change everything. Prime activated a recording from Sarah's makeshift research station. Sarah's voice came through clearly, despite the constant howl of crystal storms in the background. Day 94. I've been tracking energy patterns in the crystal formations, and something doesn't add up. These aren't just random growths responding to electromagnetic storms. There's a pattern here, a rhythm that's almost organic. The hologram showed Sarah's crude but effective monitoring setup. She had rigged sensors from her escape pod's navigation system to track energy flows through the crystal matrices. The data streams painted patterns that pulsed and flowed like blood through veins. At first, Prime continued, we thought these readings were another equipment malfunction. But Sarah Chen had discovered something profound, something that had eluded our most sophisticated survey equipment. Dr. Pollock floated forward, their gaseous form rippling with excitement. She discovered that the crystal formations weren't just individual structures. They were part of a vast, interconnected network that spanned the entire planet. The hologram expanded to show a global view of surface X, 912, with lines of energy flowing through crystal veins that crisscrossed the planet's surface. The audience watched in amazement as pulses of energy moved through these pathways in complex, rhythmic patterns. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary, Prime clicked his mandibles in excitement. Sarah didn't just observe this network, she learned to communicate with it. The recording shifted to show Sarah working with a modified crystal formation near her shelter. She had discovered that by applying specific electromagnetic frequencies, she could influence the crystal's growth patterns. But more than that, she found that the crystals would respond to her presence even without direct stimulation. Watch this, Prime instructed, zooming in on a particular sequence. Sarah was standing near a crystal formation, her hand hovering just above its surface. As the audience watched, the crystals began to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light that matched her heartbeat. The crystals weren't just responding to electromagnetic fields, Sarah's voice explained in the recording. They were responding to bioelectric fields, to life itself. And not just responding, but learning. Dr. Vex III, who had been quietly observing until now, shifted to a shade of deep contemplation. Are you suggesting these crystal formations possess some form of intelligence? Not exactly, Prime responded. What Sarah discovered was something far more fascinating. The crystals were part of a planetary-scale information processing system. But it wasn't intelligence as we understand it, it was something else entirely. The hologram showed Sarah's experiments with different crystal formations. She had begun mapping what she called resonance patterns, ways in which different crystal clusters would respond to and communicate with each other across vast distances. The crystal network wasn't just transmitting energy, Prime explained. It was transmitting information. Environmental data, growth patterns, response protocols, all being shared and processed across the entire planet's surface. And somehow, incredibly, Sarah Chen had begun to tap into this network. The recording showed Sarah's breakthrough moment. She had created what she called a crystal interface, a device that could interpret and interact with the planet's crystal network. It was cobbled together from salvaged pod components and carefully grown crystal formations. Day 112, Sarah's voice narrated. I've confirmed it. The crystal network isn't just responding to environmental conditions, it's anticipating them. It can predict storm patterns hours before they form, adjust growth patterns to compensate for pressure changes, even redirect energy flows to maintain stability in different regions of the planet. Prime paused the recording. What Sarah had discovered was nothing less than a planetary-scale adaptive system. The crystals weren't just growing, they were evolving, learning, and responding to their environment in real time. The hologram shifted to show Sarah's most startling discovery. Deep within the crystal matrices, she had found microscopic structures that defied conventional classification, not quite organic, not quite mineral, but something in between. She called them crystal seeds, Pollock-Wave explained. These structures contained information, not genetic code as we understand it, but patterns of growth and response that could be passed on and modified through successive generations of crystal formation. The audience watched in fascination as the hologram demonstrated how these crystal seeds would respond to environmental challenges by developing new growth patterns, which would then be transmitted through the planet's crystal network and replicated in other regions. But the most remarkable aspect, Prime continued, was how Sarah's presence began to influence this system. The crystal network wasn't just teaching her how to survive, it was learning from her as well. The recording showed how crystal formations near Sarah's shelter had begun to develop new growth patterns that seemed specifically adapted to support human life. They would automatically adjust their structure to help regulate temperature and pressure, filter radiation in ways that were beneficial rather than harmful, and even process atmospheric compounds into more breathable mixtures. What we were witnessing, Prime explained, was the beginning of a new kind of symbiosis. Sarah Chen wasn't just adapting to Surface X-912, Surface X-912 was adapting to her. Dr. Vex III's color shifted to a shade indicating deep scientific curiosity. But how could such a system evolve? What could have created something so complex? Prime's crystals sparkled with satisfaction. That's where Sarah's next discovery came in. Because beneath the surface of X-912, she found something that would challenge every definition of life we thought we understood. The hologram showed Sarah's first exploration of a deep crystal cavity she had discovered near her shelter. The recordings from her suit cameras revealed something extraordinary, patterns of crystal growth that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, forming structures of impossible complexity. What Sarah found in that cavity wasn't just another crystal formation, Prime announced. It was something far more significant. Something that would force us to completely reconsider our understanding of life itself. The audience watched in stunned silence as the recording showed Sarah's discovery, a vast chamber where crystal formations grew in patterns that mimicked organic structures, creating what appeared to be a kind of crystalline ecosystem. But this wasn't just a random collection of crystal growths, Prime continued. What Sarah had discovered was nothing less than the heart of Surface X-912's crystal network, a place where the boundary between mineral and living tissue began to blur. The recording showed Sarah's careful documentation of the crystal chamber. She had found structures that seemed to serve specific functions, some gathering and processing energy from the planet's storms, others storing and distributing resources through the crystal network, and still others appearing to act as some kind of information processing centers. What we were seeing, Prime explained, was an entirely new form of life. Not carbon-based, not silicon-based, but something that existed at the intersection of mineral growth and organic complexity. And Sarah Chen wasn't just studying it, she was becoming part of it. The hologram showed how Sarah had begun to map the functions of different crystal structures, learning to interpret and even influence their growth patterns. She discovered that the crystal network could be programmed through careful application of electromagnetic fields, allowing her to create specialized crystal formations that could serve specific purposes. But perhaps most remarkably, Prime continued, she found that the crystal network was already changing in response to her presence. It wasn't just adapting to support her survival, it was learning from her, incorporating her patterns of thought and problem-solving into its own development. Dr. Pollock-Wave floated forward again. The implications were staggering. We weren't just looking at a new form of life, we were witnessing the birth of a new kind of symbiosis, one that could bridge the gap between organic and mineral existence. The amphitheater hummed with excited discussion as Prime prepared to reveal the next phase of Sarah's discoveries. The story of the crystal network was extraordinary enough, but what came next would challenge their understanding of life, intelligence, and adaptation in ways they had never imagined. But even this, Prime announced, his voice carrying a note of anticipation, was just the beginning. Because what Sarah Chen discovered next would take us beyond the realm of biological adaptation and into something far more profound, a discovery that would force us to question not just how life adapts, but what life itself truly is, the breakthrough. Dr. Prime's crystalline structure resonated with a frequency his colleagues had never witnessed before, a harmonic pattern that indicated extreme scientific excitement. The holographic displays in the Grand Medical Amphitheater shifted once again, now showing Sarah Chen's most daring experiments with Surface X912's crystal network. What you're about to witness, Prime announced, represents the moment when survival became mastery, and discovery became revolution. His mandibles clicked rapidly as he organized the data streams. For months into her stay on Surface X912, Sarah Chen didn't just understand the crystal network, she began to transform it. The recording showed Sarah in her modified pressure suit, standing before a massive crystal formation she had cultivated. Her voice came through clearly, Day 127. I've confirmed something extraordinary. The crystal network doesn't just process information, it remembers. And more than that, it can learn. Dr. Vex III leaned forward, her coloration shifting to intense focus. Are you suggesting some form of crystalline consciousness? Not exactly, Prime replied. What Sarah discovered was something far more profound. Show them, Pollock-Wave. The hologram expanded to display Sarah's experimental setup. She had created what she called a crystal interface matrix, a complex arrangement of carefully grown crystals connected to salvaged equipment from her escape pod. But unlike her earlier experiments, this wasn't just about survival or communication. Watch this, Prime instructed, starting the recording. Sarah stood before her crystal interface, her hands hovering over specific formations. As the audience watched, she began to manipulate electromagnetic fields with precise movements. The crystals responded, growing and reshaping themselves in complex patterns that seemed to defy natural law. Day 132, Sarah's voice narrated. The crystal network doesn't just respond to input, it anticipates it. It's like it's completing my thoughts before I even finish forming them. And there's something else, something I'm only beginning to understand. The hologram showed Sarah's next breakthrough. She had discovered that the crystal formations could store and process information in ways that made quantum computers look primitive. But more than that, they could adapt their processing methods based on the problems they encountered. She called it adaptive computation, Prime explained. The crystal network wasn't just solving problems, it was evolving new ways to solve them. And with each evolution, it became more efficient, more complex, more capable. Dr. Pollock floated forward, their gaseous form swirling with excitement. But the true breakthrough came on day 145. Show them the interface event. The recording shifted to show Sarah working with a particularly large crystal formation. She had connected it to her makeshift laboratory equipment in a new configuration, attempting something that even she acknowledged was probably impossible. I know this sounds crazy, Sarah's voice came through, tinged with both excitement and exhaustion, but I think the crystal network isn't just a planetary-scale computer. It's a planetary-scale laboratory. And it's been running experiments for millions of years. The hologram showed her evidence. Deep within the crystal matrices, she had found patterns that suggested long-term evolutionary experiments. The crystal network hadn't just been adapting to its environment, it had been actively testing different adaptations, selecting the most successful ones, and implementing them across the entire planet. But here's where it gets truly extraordinary, Prime continued. Sarah Chen didn't just discover this process, she learned to accelerate it. The audience watched in amazement as Sarah demonstrated her technique. Using her crystal interface, she could now introduce new patterns into the network, suggesting new forms of adaptation. The crystal formations would then test these patterns, modify them, and either implement or discard them based on their effectiveness. She had effectively turned Surface X-912 into the largest experimental laboratory in known space, Prime explained. But she wasn't just conducting experiments, she was collaborating with the planet itself. The recording showed Sarah's most ambitious experiment yet. She had theorized that if the crystal network could adapt to support her survival, it might be possible to teach it to support other forms of life as well. Day 156, Sarah's voice was filled with determination. I'm attempting something that either proves everything I've learned or kills me instantly. I call it environmental programming. The hologram displayed her preparations. She had created a complex array of crystal formations around her shelter, each one carefully grown and tuned to respond to specific frequencies. Her goal was ambitious, to reprogram a small section of Surface X-912's environment to be naturally habitable for human life. What happened next, Prime announced, defied every law of physics and biology we thought we understood. The recording showed Sarah activating her crystal array. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the crystal formations began to pulse with an inner light. The energy patterns flowing through the network changed, becoming more organized, more purposeful. Watch the environmental readings, Prime instructed. The data streams showed something impossible. Within the area Sarah had designated, the extreme conditions of Surface X-912 began to moderate. Temperature swings became less severe. Radiation levels dropped to manageable levels. The atmospheric pressure began to stabilize. She wasn't just creating a shelter, Prime explained. She was teaching the crystal network how to create and maintain conditions suitable for human life. But the network didn't just follow her instructions, it improved upon them. The hologram showed how the crystal formations had begun to develop new structures, ones that Sarah hadn't designed. They were creating systems to filter the atmosphere, regulate temperature, and even generate a protective field against the planet's deadly radiation. But the most remarkable aspect, Prime continued, was how the network began to replicate these changes across other regions of the planet. It wasn't just learning from Sarah, it was applying those lessons on a global scale. Dr. Vextherd's color shifted to pure amazement. Are you suggesting the entire planet was adapting based on her experiments? Exactly, Prime's crystals sparkled with excitement. But it went even further than that. Sarah discovered that the crystal network wasn't just adapting the environment, it was developing new ways to interface with organic life itself. The recording showed Sarah's final and most daring experiment. She had theorized that the crystal network's ability to process and adapt information might extend to biological systems as well. Using her own bioelectric field as a template, she began to develop what she called biocrystalline interfaces, structures that could directly connect organic nervous systems to the planet's crystal network. Day 178, Sarah's voice carried a mix of awe and trepidation. I'm about to attempt direct neural interface with the crystal network. Either this works and we discover something revolutionary, or, well, let's hope it works. The audience watched in stunned silence as Sarah connected herself to her biocrystalline interface. The results were beyond anything they could have imagined. The crystal network didn't just accept her input, Prime explained. It established a two-way connection. Sarah could now perceive the entire planetary network directly, understanding its processes and patterns in ways our instruments never could. But more importantly, the network could understand her. The hologram showed the aftermath of her experiment. The crystal formations around her shelter had begun to develop entirely new structures, ones that seemed to bridge the gap between organic and mineral existence. They weren't just supporting life, they were learning to communicate with it on a fundamental level. What Sarah Chen achieved wasn't just survival or adaptation, Prime announced. She had discovered a way to forge a true symbiosis between organic life and the crystal network of Surface X, 912. But even she couldn't have predicted what happened next. The recording showed the final days of Sarah's experiments, leading up to the moment that would change everything. The crystal network had begun to exhibit behaviors that went beyond mere adaptation or response. It was developing something entirely new, a form of existence that defied all conventional classification. But before we reveal the ultimate outcome of Sarah's work, Prime said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent tone, we need to understand exactly what happened when our research vessel finally made contact. Because what we found wasn't just a survivor or a scientist, we found someone who had become something more than human, yet somehow more deeply human than ever before. The amphitheater hummed with anticipation as Prime prepared to reveal the final chapter of Sarah Chen's extraordinary journey. The implications of her discoveries were still unfolding, promising to reshape their understanding of life, intelligence, and the very nature of existence itself. A new chapter in galactic science. Dr. Prime's crystalline structure pulsed with a deep resonance as he prepared to reveal the final chapter of Sarah Chen's extraordinary story. The grand medical amphitheater had been silent for several moments, the assembled scientists still processing the implications of her groundbreaking experiments. The moment of first contact with Sarah Chen, Prime began, his voice carrying a note of reverence, wasn't just a rescue mission. It was first contact with something entirely new in the galaxy. The holographic display shifted to show the approach of the research vessel to Sarah's transformed habitat on Surface X, 912. What they found defied every expectation. Day 184, came Sarah's final personal log entry. They're coming. I can feel their ship through the crystal network. But I'm not sure they're ready for what I've become, what we've become. The recording showed the research team's first glimpse of Sarah's habitat. What had started as a crude shelter cobbled together from escape pod debris had evolved into something that defied conventional architecture. Crystal formations had grown into elegant, functional structures that pulsed with inner light, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem in the midst of the planet's chaos. When we first detected her life signs, Dr. Pollock-Wave added, their gaseous form rippling with the memory, our instruments couldn't make sense of the readings. She was simultaneously human and something else. The hologram showed Sarah emerging to meet the rescue team. She wore no pressure suit, despite the lethal environment. Instead, she was surrounded by a shifting field of crystalline energy that moved with her like a second skin. What you're seeing, Prime explained, is the final stage of adaptation. Sarah Chen hadn't just survived Surface X, 912, she had achieved perfect symbiosis with it. The crystal network had become an extension of her nervous system, and she had become an integral part of its planetary consciousness. Dr. Vextherd's color shifted to deep contemplation. But how is this possible? The energy requirements alone, That's just it, Prime clicked his mandibles excitedly. She had transcended our understanding of biological limitations. The crystal network wasn't just supporting her life, it had helped her evolve into something that could thrive in conditions we thought impossible. The recording showed Sarah's first conversation with the rescue team. Her voice came through clearly, though it seemed to resonate through the crystal formations around her. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to now. Surface X, 912 isn't just a planet, it's a laboratory for the next step in evolution. And we've only scratched the surface of what's possible. Prime paused the playback. What Sarah Chen discovered wasn't just a way to survive in extreme conditions. She had found a path to what she called adaptive convergence, a state where organic life and mineral systems could evolve together, creating something greater than the sum of their parts. The hologram displayed the results of their initial scans of Sarah's transformed physiology. Her cellular structure had been fundamentally altered, incorporating crystalline elements that allowed her to process energy directly from the planet's electromagnetic storms. Her nervous system had developed new pathways that could interface directly with the crystal network, and her DNA had been modified in ways that their best geneticists were still trying to understand. But perhaps most remarkably, Prime continued, these changes weren't limited to her physical form. Sarah's consciousness had expanded to encompass the entire crystal network. She could perceive and influence environmental conditions across the whole planet, processing information through the crystalline matrix in ways our most advanced computers couldn't match. Dr. Pollock floated forward. We offered to evacuate her, of course. But she refused. She had become something more than a survivor or even a researcher. She had become a pioneer of a new form of existence. The hologram showed Sarah's new research facility, built in collaboration with the Crystal Network. She had begun teaching the rescue team how to communicate with the planet's consciousness, showing them how to grow and shape crystal formations that could support various forms of life. In the 6 months since our initial contact, Prime announced, we've established a permanent research station on Surface X, 912. Under Sarah's guidance, we're learning to understand and replicate her discoveries. The implications for everything from medicine to space colonization are beyond calculation. The display shifted to show the changes already spreading across Surface X, 912. Regions of the planet were being gradually transformed, the crystal network learning to create and maintain environments suitable for different forms of life. But it wasn't just terraforming, it was something far more sophisticated. Sarah Chen didn't just survive the impossible, Prime explained. She discovered a new path for life itself. The ability to adapt not through generations of natural selection, but through direct cooperation between organic and mineral systems. She showed us that the boundaries we thought existed between different forms of life were really just limitations in our understanding. The hologram showed recent footage of Sarah working with a team of xenobiologists, teaching them how to interface with the crystal network. Her movements were fluid and precise, her body glowing with crystalline energy as she demonstrated techniques for growing biocompatible crystal structures. But the most profound impact, Prime continued, isn't just scientific. Sarah Chen's discovery forces us to reconsider our entire understanding of life, adaptation, and consciousness itself. The crystal network of Surface X, 912 isn't just a planetary computer or a unique ecosystem, it's a blueprint for the future of life in the galaxy. Dr. Vex III raised a sensory appendage. Are you suggesting this could be replicated on other worlds? Not exactly replicated, Prime responded. But the principles Sarah discovered, the potential for direct evolutionary cooperation between organic and mineral systems, could be applied in countless ways. We've already begun experiments with creating smaller crystal matrices that could help life adapt to other extreme environments. The hologram showed the first successful tests, crystal formations grown under Sarah's guidance being used to create sustainable habitats in environments previously thought uninhabitable. But more than that, it showed how these systems could evolve and adapt to meet the needs of their inhabitants. Sarah Chen's legacy isn't just scientific breakthrough, Prime announced. It's a fundamental shift in how we understand the potential of life itself. She showed us that adaptation isn't just about surviving hostile conditions, it's about learning to collaborate with them, to find harmony in what we once thought was chaos. The recording showed Sarah's most recent message to the galactic scientific community: what I found on Surface X-912 isn't just a way to survive the impossible. It's a pathway to something greater, a future where life isn't limited by biological constraints, where consciousness can expand beyond individual forms, where adaptation becomes a collaborative dance between all forms of existence. Prime's crystalline structure resonated with deep significance. And so, my esteemed colleagues, we stand at the threshold of a new era in galactic science. Sarah Chen's impossible survival on Surface X-912 has opened doors we never knew existed. The question now isn't whether life can adapt to extreme conditions, it's how far that adaptation can go, and what new forms of existence might emerge from the collaboration between organic life and mineral consciousness. The hologram showed a final image, Surface X-912 as seen from orbit, its crystal formations now pulsing with organized patterns of light that spoke of intelligence, purpose, and possibility. What had once been considered a dead world had become a laboratory for the future of life itself. As we move forward, Prime concluded, we must remember that this discovery wasn't just about human resilience or scientific breakthrough. It was about opening our minds to possibilities we had never imagined. Sarah Chen didn't just survive Surface X-912, she showed us that the boundaries between possible and impossible are far more fluid than we ever dreamed. The amphitheater erupted in a symphony of communication methods, clicks, whistles, electromagnetic pulses, and chemical signatures, all expressing amazement and excitement. The implications of Sarah's discoveries would keep them busy for generations to come. But somewhere on Surface X-912, Sarah Chen continued her work, her consciousness intertwined with the crystal network, pushing the boundaries of what life could be. She had become more than just a survivor or a scientist, she had become a bridge between worlds, a pioneer of a new chapter in the story of life itself. And as the crystal storms raged across the surface of X-912, their energy now flowing in purposeful patterns, one thing became clear: this wasn't the end of a survival story. It was the beginning of something far greater, a future where the impossible wasn't just survived, but transformed into new possibilities for life throughout the galaxy.